everyone. My name is Colleen Stewart. I'm the communications coordinator for the New Hampshire Food Alliance, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our September Network Cafe. This is the first Network Cafe, a part of our 2023-2024 Network Cafe Series. The New Hampshire Food Alliance holds Network Cafes on the first Friday, except for today, of each month, September through April. And these are informal, lively conversations with our partners from New Hampshire's food system and beyond. And network cafes are just one part of our work here at the New Hampshire Food Alliance. And we are a statewide network coordinated by the Sustainability Institute at UNH that engages and connects people dedicated to growing a thriving, fair, and sustainable local food system here in the Granite State. So before we get started, I just have a couple acknowledgements and things to point you towards on that agenda that I shared in the chat, and I think Nicole can continue to share that as others join us. So as a program of UNH, we join them in being committed to building and nurturing an environment of inclusive excellence where we can all thrive. We join UNH in the belief that diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion are foundational values inextricably linked to achieving our core educational mission and embracing the many characteristics of our community members that make all of us uniquely ourselves. Also, as part of UNH and our values of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, we want to just read part of UNH's Land, Water, and Life Acknowledgement. And you are welcome to listen to the whole thing, which is linked in our agenda. As we all journey on the trail of life, we wish to acknowledge the spiritual and physical connection the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples have maintained to Indakina, homeland, which the University of New Hampshire community is honored to steward today. Okay. One last thing before we get started, just want to direct everyone's attention to the agenda, to the desired outcomes and working agreement that are on that agenda. Both of those things will provide us some guidance as we learn and connect with each other for the next hour. So just take a look at those, feel grounded in those, and I will pass it to my colleague, Nicole, who will provide an introduction to today's topic.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome. That's perfect, Ellen. Yeah, the next one. So I'm Nicole Cardwell. I'm the program director for the New Hampshire Food Alliance. I'm very excited to see you all and welcome you all today. I'm extra thrilled to be welcoming Ellen Kaler, who's the executive director of Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and the founder and fearless leader of the New England Food System Planners Partnership, which is indeed a mouthful, but is essentially a partnership of the 6 New England states food systems networks and Food Solutions New England. You can see the partners that represent on the screen here. And the New Hampshire Food Alliance has represented New Hampshire in this partnership for years now. And we recently were excited to welcome the New Hampshire Department of Ag, Markets, and Food as an official partner as well. So the partnership, as you may know, commissioned and researched a report, Ellen, you can go to the next slide, a regional approach to food system resilience, which was released a couple of months ago. And many of you have been anxiously awaiting this report and the data within it for a long, long time. And it's a lot to take in. I know I feel that way, and that I've heard that from many of you, but it's a lot of phenomenal foundational food systems data about New England and about New Hampshire that is brought together in this really beautifully curated report. And the data and information in it is really meant for all of you. It's meant for fundraising, for advocacy, for strategic planning. And we, as the New Hampshire Food Alliance, wanted to use the series this year, the Network Café series, to help you understand the data within it, to get a sense of the breadth and the depth of the data provided so that it's a little bit more digestible, a little bit more accessible to you all in your work. So that hopefully it'll help us all do our work better, and then ideally help us work more strategically together as a region. So Ellen, if you could go to the next slide. So this report has 4 volumes. Up one more. So it has 4 volumes, and we're going to use the series to dig into each one of them. So today we have Ellen Kaler. She's going to give us some context. What is the New England Food System Planners Partnership? Why this report, and why was she passionate about this idea and this focus for the report? And then give some sense of the data. I wanted to she's going to give some examples. She's going to share some New Hampshire specific data with you all. And then I've asked her to share a little bit about what she thinks is next for all of us as a region, but also specifically for New Hampshire. And then throughout the series this year, the research team lead for each of the volumes that you see here is going to come and do something similar. Share maybe 20 minutes of information, some of their favorite charts and graphs and data to come out of the research, and then be available to answer your questions so that in real time we can all understand this data better and figure out just how you can best dig into it. So that is all I was hoping to say. Ellen, I'm going to hand it off to you to dive in to this phenomenal report. And you're muted.
Great. Thank you so very much. Very excited to be here. Thank you, Nicole and Colleen, for inviting me. Really, really terrific. In fact, this cafe series is going to get replicated in some form in Vermont starting later this month. And I think Maine and maybe some of the other New England states are also thinking about it. So excited to see this series happen. It's a great way to dig into the data. And as Nicole said, there is quite a lot of data. So just to kick it off and basically give a disclaimer, I will be speaking pretty quickly. That is my norm, but I also want to do what Nicole asked, which is to get through as much as possible so that you can get some grounding in what it is that we published at the beginning of June. And you may find yourself getting frustrated that I'm moving quite along at a good clip. And just know that you will have access to the slides, you'll have access to this recording, and obviously you have access to the reports. And this is the type of data, the type of report that it will take some time to fully digest, really understand, unpack, think about the future, how it can be used. So today is really just to give you a sampling and set you up to be able to dig in deeply in a more leisurely pace. So here we go. So as Nicole mentioned, this is the New England Food System Planners Partnerships project called New England Feeding New England. And the partnership is made up of the 6 state food system planning entities, plus our very strong collaboration with Food Solutions New England, which really we're nested within that regional network. And the genesis of all of this work, of this notion of having a 30% regional food consumption goal by 2030, really the idea of that came out of the New England Food Vision's very aspirational goal of reaching 50% regional food consumption by 2060. And our partnership, we were all gathered in Detroit in 2019, and Tom Kelly from UNH Sustainability Institute was present, and we were thinking about, well, what could be a nearer term way to approach what we're ultimately trying to achieve by 2060, because we need to be able to track some milestones. And so it was at this conference we were all at with other food system planning entities in Detroit that we actually conceived of this idea. And then, as Nicole said, after we conducted all of the research and we invited, and then we were getting close to launching the report, we invited state ag department partners to join our partnership, and that is just getting underway, but has already been really, really excellent. So what is this report all about? What is the goal of this project? Well, it's by 2030, 30% of the food consumed in New England is produced, harvested, caught within New England. And we really want that for our collective efforts to focus on expanding and fortifying the region's food supply and distribution systems in an equitable and inclusive way that ensures the availability of adequate, affordable, socially and culturally appropriate products under a variety of rapidly changing climate, environmental, and public health conditions. And this became all the more real to all of us as we went through the pandemic and saw just how brittle our food supply chains can be. And so we conceived of this idea before the pandemic happened, and it turned out to be quite prescient. And it has really caught people's attention, I think, in large part because we have all gone through what we went through during the pandemic with noticing the changes in our supply chains. So New England has the capacity, the ability, and the ingenuity to create a food system that is more self-reliant. The current system presents several barriers to doing so, and we've identified those throughout this report. And so we need to come together to identify the policies, the investments that will support the public and private supply chain businesses and infrastructure in our region so that we can build a more resilient, strong regional food system where that means we have more jobs, a healthier populace, and a greater stability of our economy, workforce, and supply chains. So as I mentioned, we got underway with this research starting in 2021, actually after we raised the funding to do so. We had 16 researchers that were part of the research project. We're now in phase 2 where we've launched the reports and we're conducting a series of convenings and beginning to pull together the folks that are really excited about moving into action in a more coordinated and aligned way. So as Nicole said, there is an executive summary that's mostly what I'm going to be covering today, although I'm going to dig into some other fresh, hot off of the press, so to speak, visuals that are New Hampshire specific that don't yet show up in any of the documents you may have taken a look at. We're about to start releasing state level briefs, and there will be a New Hampshire one that will be coming out next week, and Nicole will be sending that out as it gets finalized. So one of the first things we did, of course, was we took a look at, well, what do we actually produce in New England? And what you can get from this graphic is that we produce a lot of different types of products in different categories. This is all from the US Census of Agriculture 2017, so it's a little outdated. We'll hopefully be getting new data from USDA soon. But you can see that all these, we have a lot of small percentages, but yet we have a land base that could support a lot more of these very products. So that's part of what we are going to be digging into, and I'll get into more detail as we go along. The other thing that we do is we have a very strong manufacturing sector of different types of food. Obviously, brewing and distilling are well known, but we also have a number of animal slaughtering and processing facilities. Of course, we have award-winning cheeses that are coming out of New England. We have a number of seafood products coming out of New England. So again, there's a lot of diversity of what we're actually producing in the region. Now, if we take a look at New Hampshire, based on your Census of Ag data through your state level data, you can get a snapshot here of the types of agricultural products by sales. Milk from cows is your largest percentage. You have a good bit of vegetable production as well. You can see what the top sales are for seafood products, mainly lobster, manufactured products, fluid milk, breweries, and some confectionery and sugar products. And then if you take a look at where is food being purchased in the state, sort of top areas are grocery stores, 51.3%, not a surprise. Most people get their food at grocery stores. And then 33.4% in restaurants and fast food, followed by direct sales being 1.6%. In terms of the overall region, some of the key findings that are contained in the executive summary are these. And what we did in the executive summary was we pulled out one top level finding from each of the 4 main volumes of this research package, 7 different research components. So we took a look at how are we eating today, and what would it look like if we ate in a more resilient way? What would their caloric intake be, and what would that mean in terms of how we would have to shift our diets? In volume 2, we explored what would it take to actually meet 30% of the servings of our growing population, a population in 2030 that's expected to be about 15.6 million people, and how much land would be required to be brought into production that currently is not today in order to achieve that, to give us a shot at achieving that 30% of servings of on the production side of things. In volume 3, we took a look at, well, what is the economic impact? What is the economic relevance of the food system in New England? And we actually used the in-plan model and ran the analysis in all 6 states individually to then roll up into the full, looking at the entire region. We know that close to 1 million people are employed across the region in some job related to the food system. It's about 10% of all jobs, and it generates about $190 billion worth of sales. So this is not a small sector of our economy. It's actually quite large, and often is overlooked by more traditional economic development officials. And then in volume 4, we looked at market channels, and we really dug deep into where are folks buying and acquiring their food, including it through the charitable food system, like food banks, institutions, grocery stores, restaurants, correctional facilities, etc. And we spend a lot of money on food. And so what we're trying to pose here is, we can't have New England be an island. We can't produce everything that we would want to consume. But what would it look like? What would it take if we were to actually get to 30% by 2030? Oops. So that's, as Nicole said, we're going to dig in more deeply in each one of your next cafe series. So one of the things that we started off with then after the executive summary is this common food system challenges backgrounder. And this is really a helpful document to take a look at, because one of the things that we identified was that there were basically 7 common challenges across any food system you take a look at. It applies to all 7 states in the region, but it also applies throughout the United States. There is a real lack of planning for long-term food supplies. There is no one that's really in charge of, like, do we actually produce enough food and the type of food that we should be eating in the United States, for instance. There are lots of risks to long-term food production, especially from climate change. There are challenges to farm, fishery, and food business viability because of the consolidation in the marketplace. There's ongoing exploitation of food system workers, and we break all of this stuff down in terms of race and class. There's a limited progress that has been made over the decades related to reducing diet-related health problems and reducing food and nutrition insecurity. And there's been limited progress on reducing our food waste. So one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is our population size. Currently, we're at about 15.3 million people in the 6 states. And it's projected that we will be increasing to 15.6%, and we are also diversifying our population. The demographics of our population are definitely changing. And so, but what you should take away from this chart is that, and again, no surprise probably to any of you, is that the major population centers are in the southernmost parts of New England, while the more rural areas and also the production is in the more northern parts of the 3 states, and particularly in Vermont, definitely some in the northern reaches of New Hampshire, and then also primarily in Aroostook County up in Maine. So what we need to do here, if we're really going to achieve the 30 by 30 goal, is we have to find a way to get the population centers in the southern parts of New England to care about where their food comes from, and to understand and care about the food producers that are in the northern part of the region. And we also need, of course, on the flip side, need to get producers in the northernmost parts of New England to understand that they have huge market potential by supplying more of their products, expanding their markets into southern New England. And one of the things that was one of the main drivers of our desire to take a look at this issue of what it would take to get to 30 by 30 is because we know that there is going to be increasing climate vulnerability to our region. And we wanted to understand what are those projected climate risks and how do we prepare our food supply for climate change. Not dissimilar to what happened during the pandemic when there was challenges of getting food through the national distribution system into our grocery stores. And more of us turn to our local farms and local fishers to buy more directly. What happens if the land and the sea resources are not protected as they need to be in order for us to continue to count on them and to expand that production as a mitigation and adaptation scenarios for climate change? So this gives you a sense of where there is expected to be high, medium, low, and no risk related to extreme rains, hurricanes that come through, water stress, and then also wildfires, heat stress, and sea level rise. So, and of course, what's important to know is that while in New Hampshire, you only have one county with a medium risk of sea level rise because of the small amount of coastline that you all have. Because there is such a big coastline in Maine, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, as sea level rises there is going to be even more climate migration pressures on the northernmost states as people leave the coast because of flooding to move north because they want to stay in New England. So that's going to put extra pressure on our land base that we have to take account of as well. Now, over the last since 1945, since World War II, there has been a massive migration away from rural areas and into urban areas. And that has also led to a decrease overall in agricultural land use. And while some states have stabilized over the last 10 years, other states in New England have continued to decline. And in terms of land use in New Hampshire, you can see that while you have a good number of dairy farms, that means that a lot of your acreage, available acreage for agricultural production is used to grow forages and corn silage for the dairy and the cattle industries in the region, in your state in particular. And you can see that according to the Ag Census of 2017, you have about just shy of 3,700 acres in vegetable production and about 1,700 acres in orchards, 754 in berries. So there is definitely some room here for expanding. We have the land base, but it's about how are we using the land and for what types of products.
Ellen,
and in 2020, American Farmland Trust published seminal research called Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. And that report was released on February 17th, 2020 in Boston as a joint conference that was also helped to organize by FS&E, and where they released this data. And so we wanted to amplify the use of this data because we think it's important to be able to see these business as usual scenarios. This is they have other scenarios in their report, but in this case, we chose to take a look at the business as usual scenario, because if we're looking at the historical downward trends of maintaining land and agriculture, where is that going to impact various counties? Like what's projected for certain counties based on historical trends? And you can see here that in Coas County, there is a projected by 2040 of losing another 2,700 acres of actual ag land to other forms of uses. And so this should also be a rallying cry for those of us that want to be expanding agricultures to think about how do we protect agricultural land for agricultural production going forward. One of the challenges, of course, is that for a lot of new and beginning farmers or existing farmers who are wanting to expand their operation, we're seeing the value per acre of that land becoming more and more expensive. And thus, in some cases, especially in Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Connecticut, it may be out of reach for some, unless they come from landed wealth or other forms of non-agricultural wealth that they as they're getting into farming. So this is an issue that I think also we need to address at the regional scale as well as the state level scale, of thinking about how is the best agricultural land actually valued in the marketplace, and how do we value it in such a way that we're able to retain it in agricultural production. One of the other things that we talk about in the common challenges and throughout this report is we show where there is the prevalence of food insecurity in the country. And this is food insecurity by race and ethnicity across the country. And you can see that Black, Hispanic residents are by far experiencing very high food insecurity rates. And even though the overall food insecurity rate dropped during the pandemic because of the doubling of SNAP benefits, non-white populations were affected. Those rates did not come down nearly to what they needed to be to basically eliminate the food insecurity in our communities, which we really need to be moving towards ending hunger and ending food insecurity. And in New Hampshire, you got your rates down to 5.4% in 2021, again, because of basically a doubling of your SNAP benefits. Those rates we're expecting to rise again as those SNAP benefits expire. We also did a lot to take a look at the data from a racial lens, and in this particular case, taking a look at where the various demographic populations actually living and what is their access to food. So there's a wonderful data set known as LILA, or the Low Income, Low Access Census Tract data, and it takes a look at each census tract in the whole country, but in this case, looking at New Hampshire and looking at where is there a concentration of poverty, as well as and the racial profile of that poverty. And then we've also been able to overlay where are the stores in relation to where people are living. And in no surprise, in many cases, in areas where there is a lot of low-income families, they also have a low access to actually being able to get food within a reasonable distance from where they are living. And these are all things that need to be substantially addressed going forward as well. So in looking at the economic impact in the region of the food system in New Hampshire, you have over 92,000 people employed in the food system. And the sales in 2017 anyways was over $14 billion. So you can think of this as your gross state product. You have the food system represents $14.1 billion worth of economic activity, both direct, indirect, and induced activity. And because we all need to eat, food sales, the growth in sales tends to be kind of recession proof in essence. So even over time, we've seen that unless there's a sharp decrease in the overall population, it tends to be the case that sales continue to increase even when there are downturns in the economy. And how does New Hampshire relate to the other New England states? Massachusetts obviously is the largest population, thus they have the largest number of food jobs and they have the largest sales by state. But New Hampshire ranks third in the ratings of 6 states. And you can see there what your population, food system jobs, and food sales are as a share of the total. Now, one of the things we wanted to call attention to is that there's a lot of different careers in the food system, many of which do not pay sufficiently. What we did was we took a look at the MIT living wage data and applied that to a number of occupational titles from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and tracked that to show where there are jobs that are falling short of a livable wage within the food system. And again, this I don't think that you should take away from this that, oh, well, we shouldn't be investing in food system jobs because they just inherently pay less. think the conclusion here is, what can we do to support food system businesses and farms to actually become more profitable so that they can afford to pay better wages and benefits? Because we need these jobs, we need these workers, and we need them to have a livable wage to support themselves and their families. Now, one of the other interesting things to understand about New England's food system, and this is not dissimilar to other parts of the country, is that we have a pretty strong concentration of certain types of agriculture, and then when you take a look at the number of farms that account for the majority of the sales, things are really quite lopsided. So here you see that the dairy and cattle industry represents $1 billion worth of sales, and yet beef cattle, there are 3,400 farms, and then we have in dairy and cattle, it's 1,421, as opposed to 8,000 farms that do hay, that only leads to $236 million worth of sales. So there's really, it's just an area for us to spend some time on in terms of thinking about how might we want to actually change this in the going forward. Whoops. And this is another way to understand the issue around net profits is even more stark and more important for us to be looking at, because when you think about New England agriculture, you think a lot about small farms and their size, and we have over 21,000 farms that make less than $10,000. Now, I would argue that we need to change the definition of what constitutes an actual farm for the purposes of really looking at this kind of data going forward. The U.S. Department of Agriculture definition of a farm in this country has not changed since the 1930s, and it basically is, you can call yourself a farm if you have at least $1,000 worth of sales. Back then, you might be able to eke out a living on that, but and today you certainly can't. And so the thing to look at here is that it's not until you really reach about 250,000 worth of sales that you really start to earn enough of a profit that you could think about being able to support your family, maybe bringing on some additional workers, as well as in reinvesting in your farm or food business. You're in your farm. So we take a look at the number of farms, for instance, between 500,000 and $1 million in sales. There's just 506 of them in the whole 6-state region. So if we think about wanting to expand our production to reach that 30 by 30 goal, we need to be thinking about how do we focus more of our resources, our technical assistance and investment resources, into those farms that actually want to expand into additional acreage, additional food production, so that we can have a greater chance of actually having viable farms that then have the ability to feed more of the population going forward. So as I mentioned in volume 1, we're estimating resilient eating patterns, and Brian Donahue, who was one of the research team members back in 2012 to 14 when the New England Food Vision was being developed, was the team lead for this volume 1 team that explored resilient eating patterns. And what they did was they started with the New England Food Vision 2014, 3 different scenarios, and brought those up to current day numbers and used, and that became then the baseline, and then developed 2 different scenarios. One which looks at, well, what are we eating today, and what would we be eating in 2030 if we didn't do any changes to our diet? We would be at, on average, about 2,700 calories without alcohol, and that's about 400 calories more than what is recommended by the USDA. And then we said, well, when we convened a panel of dietitians and health experts, nutritionists, and worked with them on constructing and thinking about how would we adjust an eating pattern that we would call the resilient eating pattern, and what would that look like in terms of caloric intake, and how would that be spread across different types of food categories. And what that looks like is we would be looking to increase our fruit consumption by 2 cups a day. We'd be increasing our vegetable consumption by 3 cups a day. We'd probably maintain our dairy consumption about what we are today at 1.5 cups a day. Decrease proteins just slightly, but that decrease would be, we would be eating more seafood, nuts, and beans, and not just animal protein. We'd have about the same in grains, a decrease in sweeteners and a decrease in fats and oils. That's how we would get to that caloric goal of 2320. There's a lot more there, but Brian Donahue is going to be joining you all at your next cafe series, so he'll be able to dig in much more deeply into the data. So I'm going to move along to volume 2, which is really about production. And one of the things that, so we took the data from the volume 1 of the resilient eating, and then we said, okay, well, what are we actually producing today in the region? And what are we actually consuming today in the region? And then created a simple ratio, what's called a regional self-reliance ratio, that basically shows that we are more than self-reliant from a 30% perspective in dairy and also in vegetables, but we are well below regional self-reliance in fruits and proteins. Looks like Betty is doing some drawing. Maybe we can end that. Thanks. So basically what this indicates is that 20.7% of, we produce 20.7% of what we consume in the region. However, that does not mean that our local food consumption is 20.7%, because a lot of what we produce in the region is actually exported, which is why we're doing a local food counts right now in New Hampshire and Maine and Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, so we can actually get to a baseline of what are we actually eating in terms of local food in each of the states. Now, we saw that in vegetables, we were actually over that 30% mark, but I need to say that, importantly, 82% of that is basically starchy, which is primarily potatoes from Maine. So, and you take a look at the other types of vegetables, dark greens, red and orange legumes, we have a lot more we could be doing to make this a little bit more even across what we're producing. On the level of proteins, obviously we're more than self-reliant in seafood. Again, a lot of that leaves the region, and we have the ability to be raising and consuming a lot more of other types of protein if we were to raise it in New England. When it comes to agricultural sales overall, in New Hampshire, you can see the spread here. Greenhouses and nurseries, which is not for food consumption, is your largest agricultural product, followed by dairy at 42 million, vegetables and melons at 20 million, and on its way down to let's see, other animals at 3.5 million. And in terms of the value of your seafood landings, about 27 million. That's a decrease over a high of 2018, so something to take a look at there. A variety of reasons, and we actually have a whole seafood supplement that dives deep into these issues, as well as a treatment of existing seafood production in volume 2. Now, as I said, in order to achieve that 30% mark, based on the servings of what we identified, the servings needed to be in volume 2 related to the diets in volume 1, what we arrived at through a very complex model that Chris Peters from USDA ARS produced, we need to increase, better utilize existing cropland, 400,000 acres of existing cropland, and then we need to bring 590,000 more new acres of cropland into production in order to achieve that 30% RSR. In volume 4, we do a deep dive into markets, and we identified here, we wanted to really show in I think, a very visually capturing kind of way. We spend in New England $85.5 billion on food. 46% of that, or $39.54 billion, is at grocery stores and supermarkets. And yet that is the hardest market for us to break into in terms of our local products. Next is restaurants and fast foods. We spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get into food service contracts, and yet that represents 3.7% of total sales, which is important, and we should be doing that. It helps in so many ways. There's a lot of food access involved in that. However, I guess the point of this is really that it's insufficient. We need to figure out how to break into the grocery and to the restaurant markets more with our local food. Direct sales, farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, et cetera, is 0.3% of all sales across the region, or just $293 million. In New Hampshire, it looks like this. You're spending about $8.4 billion on food every year. 4.3 billion of that is at grocery stores. So just think in terms of how much more money would be staying local and in the pockets of producers if we could get more of their products into grocery stores and at a price point that works for them. That's another part of this, of course. In New Hampshire, you have a lot of different types of stores. Independent stores represent 105 of them. What's really important here is to think about independently owned stores, similar to what we're doing with trying to get into hospitals and schools and universities, for instance, in that they are locally owned. And so we have a greater ability to influence and inform them about why it's really a helpful thing to do to both sell more, but also to differentiate against the large chains. Because New Hampshire has almost as many Dollar Tree, Dollar Value, and Dollar General stores as you have independent stores. And then Hannaford's has 38 stores throughout the state, for instance. They have a very strong local program they could be doing more. But again, I think that there's a strategy to be developed in New Hampshire to look at Hannaford's market baskets, for instance, your food co-ops, and some of these other stores, along with the independents, who might be more open to actually sourcing more local food.
Ellen, this is your warning that you're we get
almost
into
there.
Q&A soon.
Yes.
Very soon.
Yes. So as I mentioned, direct sales is a very small percentage of the total sales. And one of the other things that we did was we looked at how much are people spending on food of their total expenditures of all the major categories of what they spend their dollars on annually. And food represents a little over 12% of our total dollar spend. So we broke down what kinds of food is purchased. This is all from consumer expenditure surveys that the USDA has published. And the bottom line here is, if to get to 30%, if New Hampshireites are spending close to $7,000 a year on food in 2030, if they were to shift, you all were to shift what you're purchasing by basically $2,000 a year, then you all could be at 30%. So that doesn't mean adding to the total you're spending on food. It's talking about shifting from what New Hampshireites are currently spending on and what they could be spending on if they had greater access and we had greater production of local product and available where people shop. So a few takeaways about how you can get involved. Stay involved with the New Hampshire Food Alliance. Nicole and her team are doing a fabulous job, and we definitely want you all to consider spearheading a New Hampshire food system strategic plan. We have one in Vermont, a second 10-year plan in Vermont. Rhode Island is currently doing their second 5-year plan. Maine and Massachusetts and Connecticut are all considering doing more robust strategic planning as well. And we also want to encourage, we're also going to be trying to have a conversation about how could we get all 6 New England states to have roughly the same local food definition. So what is the definition of New Hampshire local? that would be great to get through your legislature. And then, as I mentioned, we're conducting a local food count, and New Hampshire is fully engaged currently with collecting the data over the next couple of months. We hope to have that report out the beginning of the year. Encourage you to keep reading the reports and use the research to support your work and identify ways that your organization can align and contribute to this 30% by 2030 regional goal. And that's what I got for you. So I think we can now open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Ellen. You're going to probably have to reshare some slides as we go back. You had a lot of questions throughout. Colleen and I have been trying to comb through them. Many of them were already answered. So let's see. Does anyone have hands raised? So we have, there were a lot of questions about clearing existing forest land to grow food. Could you speak a little bit to how that's considered in the data and thinking?
Yeah, we didn't get into a lot of detail on that. It was really just identifying, it was really a mathematical question. What if we really want to have 30% of servings? How much land do we need? And what do we currently have in agri-production? What's that delta? So in the case of clearing, I think what we're considering here is there's an awful lot of agricultural land that has gone back into forest. So that would be sort of the first place to start, is areas on the edges of existing fields that maybe have not been cultivated in a long time, and to bring those back into production. As some of you may know, FSNE is also collaborating with a number of partners on the Wildlands, Woodlands, and Communities update, and they're looking at this same question from a forest perspective. So we're starting to have conversations about the intersection between healthy forest ecosystems and a land base that supports the kind of food production that we need in the region.
Thank you. This is a quick-ish one. Are schools considered in the markets slides and section? Are schools considered part of food service contractors?
Correct.
I think they are.
Yeah.
So Rachel, that was yours.
And in some cases, if they're, I mean, for instance, if they are self-ops, they're going to be in there as well, because it's really about what is the market channel as opposed to who operates them.
Did we consider any wild harvested protein beyond seafood? Rachel mentioned how many deer are hunted and consumed in New Hampshire.
No, we intentionally decided that we couldn't try to capture that, in large part because that data doesn't exist, or it is not kept in a regularized way, and we really were looking at dollars. So, for instance, we also don't take into account people having gardens, for instance, or having homesteads. For the purposes of this exercise, we were really trying to identify what is the dollar value of what we're producing in the region, what are we selling in the region. So obviously, for an individual family, you are maybe cutting back on how much is being spent relative to other families if you are hunting, if you are fishing, if you have you're putting food by from your garden. That just means you're spending dollar-wise less on food, but that means that you're probably getting to 30% or more faster. So all good stuff. There's just certain realities of working with data sets that we just can't get around in these cases. Love to know that. We're not able to get to dig into urban agriculture and what is the value, for instance, of lots that are inner city lots, for instance, that are being brought back into local production. Again, that data just is not really there yet.
And I just heard about a potential survey and source of data about growing food in New Hampshire on homesteads that we might be able to partner with in the future. But I'm going to transition us to another question. So the 27% of production number. So I'll try and explain the regional self-reliance number. Ellen, you can correct me here, but it's sort of a theoretical. What are we eating as a region? What are we growing as a region? And then how do those two data sets overlap? And so that you might be growing blueberries in Maine, and we might be eating blueberries in New Hampshire, but are we eating so the 27% speaks to that, but are we eating the blueberries from Maine? We don't know right now. And so it's a theoretical that resilience calculation. Does that, Ellen, do you want to try and explain it better?
Pretty close. Good job. It's 20.7%, not 27%. That's important. 20.7%. So you could say 21%. So basically, across all food categories, what are we producing? By pounds. Those metrics are pounds. Then what are we consuming in pounds? That is a ratio then of what are we consuming versus what are we producing. That's how you get to the 20.7%. But because so many Maine blueberries leave the region, lobster leaves the region, dairy products leave the region, maple products leave the region, we don't actually consume 20.7% of, meaning 100% of what we actually grow here or raise or catch here, right? We produce 20%, we produce 20.7% of what we are in fact eating, but not all of that of what we're producing is being consumed in the region. It's being exported. So the big question is, how do we shift and retain more of what we produce to be consumed in the region, but then how do we also expand production to achieve that 30% by 2030 goal?
Great. And Elizabeth said, thank you. That clarifies. I hope it clarifies for others. It took me a bit to grasp that nuance there. We have a request to look at figure 17 and just comment on it a little bit more. It says, would you be willing to discuss figure 17 more? I don't remember what 17 was.
Figure 17. Actually, I don't know my numbers of figures. What was the topic?
Maybe it was this. I'm not sure. I'm waiting for him to. It's John Frisk, I believe, wrote that comment in. If you want to, there's one.
It's slide 34, Ellen.
There we go. Yeah. So this is the New England Farms by value of sales. So what this shows is across the 6 states, each one of these bars has the 6 states' sales data in it. So for instance, if you take a look at the dairy cattle 1 billion in sales, Vermont represents 21% of that 1 billion is Vermont dairy sales. Maine is the next bar up, and so forth. So you see across all different types of products, what is the value of the sales of those different products? So for instance, in vegetables and melons, it's $448 million annually. Now, if to the right of that, what that's showing is of the numbers of farms in those different product categories, what are the sales amounts of those product categories, not by state, but by sales. So the one on the left is sales by those product categories by state, and the one on the right is by sales of those product categories, not by state. So for instance, in the same example of vegetables, for instance, 3,295 farms, you can see of those farms how many are making less than 1,000, how many farms are having sales of 1,000 to 2,500 in sales of that product category across the 6 states in terms of the number of total as a percentage of the total farms. I get that this is a little complex and definitely worth reading the text that goes along with this graphic because it will elucidate things a lot more. But the bottom line is in New England, we have 32,336 farms that are producing $2.9 billion in sales. And this is an attempt to break it down by product category, by state, and by sales volume by product category. Okay.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm just trying to keep up with all the comments here. And Rachel, I just want to say, I agree. Rachel said that she finds this very hopeful and exciting because it provides a lot of data to use to seek funding. for your work. And that's one of the very central intentions, I think, of this compilation of data.
Absolutely. And if anybody ever needs it, all of this, the data, these graphics are in JPEG form. And if there's something in particular that you need for a presentation or to include an actual graphic in something that you're producing, just be in touch with Nicole, and she has access to it all.
Absolutely. I think we should, it's hard to keep up with all the questions. I think we answered a lot of them, and that you'll have a chance to dig into the volumes as we go through with the lead researchers. Let's take this last one here and wrap up from there. Is anyone working on this project also keeping an eye on the new USDA Climate Smart Commodity Program? Oh, Ellen, do you want to try to respond to that one?
Keeping an eye on, I'm not sure what that means. I mean, any of the new programs, especially if there's funding, all of the state partners and our state agencies of departments of agriculture are keeping an eye on funding opportunities. If there's new data coming out, we would definitely want to be keeping an eye out for that. In fact, that consumer expenditure data that I showed you literally came out 3 weeks before we were ready to publish, and we scrambled and were able to include that data, which basically got to what's the dollar amount that would get a personal consumption to get to 30%. So when new data comes, we get very excited. So if you come across stuff you think we should know about, and we may not, send it along.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Ellen, for being here and presenting all of this and for spearheading this initiative. I want to say that I think one of the most incredible parts of what Ellen has done with this partnership is bring the 6 state food system planning networks together. So I, for example, get to learn from her regularly, learn from what they've done in Vermont, learn from what they're doing in Rhode Island, and bring that information back to New Hampshire. And also, I think New Hampshire is leading in some really new and innovative ways. So it's been just a phenomenal partnership, and I appreciate you being here, Ellen, and to speak directly to us all about that. I do see that we didn't answer some questions, but I'm gonna ask that we'll try and follow up with some of them, or come to future network cafes. We have Colleen put our network cafe evaluation in the chat. It's just less than 30 seconds. So just please take that. That's something you can do to help us keep these cafes informative and engaging and valuable for you. And make sure to register for the rest of the series. You just register once typically, but this month was an anomaly because we were avoiding Labor Day weekend. Colleen, what did I miss?
Nothing. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to continuing this series with all of you in October.
Thanks so much. Good luck, everybody. Go, New Hampshire.
Thanks, Ellen.
Take care, everyone.